Good morning, church. Woo! All right. We have a very special thing for you this morning. So we're going to do this before the kids go to children's church, so I make sure that they get an opportunity to see it. But we have a very special interview this morning, and without giving you any other information, we'll just let you witness this very special interview that we have.
In over 2,000 within the Easter story has never really ever been told. The night that Jesus was betrayed, Simon Peter told Jesus that he would follow him to the Jesus told Peter that before the rooster crows, times. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the rooster. Mr. Rooster, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
You can just call me Rooster.
Well, Rooster, I'm glad you could join us.
Oh, it's about time. It's been 2,000 years before anybody talked to me.
What do you mean?
What do you mean? Easter comes every year, doesn't it? And it's been 2,000 Easters.
Yeah, I guess it has.
Easter story. I mean, it comes every year, and new pastors and teachers and everybody's always looking for a different angle on this story. And you talk about Jesus' story, and you talk about Pilate's story, and you talk about Judas' story and Peter. You even told about Barabbas and his story, but you ever hear about the rooster? No rooster.
Well, you would have to admit that you do play kind of a minor character in this story.
Minor character? Jesus didn't say when the morning comes, or when the cow moves, or when the dog barks. He said when the rooster crows. The rooster.
And that's you, huh?
That's me. Yeah.
Well,
it's Easter pageant. Everybody's looking at a new angle for this thing, but when it comes around, they're always bringing out these characters, and they forget about the old rooster here. And whenever you do hear about the rooster, what it is recording off on the side somewhere. But you'll drag out a donkey, you'll drag out the pig, the chickens, the lambs, and even the camel. A camel, Travis.
I hear you.
A camel, that's the Easter story. But everybody loves the camel, so here comes the camel.
Well, what we'd like to hear is the story from your point of view.
My point of view? Well, it's about time. All right, let's see. Well, I went to bed at about 9 o'clock. Alarm went off at 4:30. Had my coffee, read the paper. And then close to 5, I crowed.
That's it?
What did you expect, angels?
Well, no, at least the truth.
Well, angels don't come visit chickens.
How come?
Chickens spook.
Oh, God, yeah, they do. Well, so I guess then it was just another regular day for you, huh?
Yeah, to all of us, it's just regular, nothing out of the ordinary.
So you had no clue what was happening?
Nope, didn't get no memo. I mean, we didn't know what Good Friday was. It's just another Friday to us.
Well, you at least did eventually hear about the story. What happened, didn't you?
Yeah, there was this kid, Mark. He interviewed me.
Oh, you mean Mark, the gospel writer?
Yeah, that's him, that kid. He talked to me for about 3 hours. He got my whole life story. Gave me 2 sentences.
Well, so then at least you did hear the rest of the story.
Yes, I did, Paul Harvey.
Well, what did you think about it once you heard it?
I'm glad it wasn't me and it was Peter.
I bet.
I felt sorry for that fella, Peter. He had it pretty rough there. He had denied his best friend, and I don't know I don't know how he felt, man. He's forgiven in that situation. I just don't know. I don't know how I felt. I felt guilty myself after that.
Really?
Yeah, and it was kind of crazy. Here Jesus knew that Peter was going to deny him, but he forgave him anyway. That's hard to believe.
Well, I think Peter's story is symbolic to all of us. Jesus died for everyone. And Jesus forgiving Peter, his best friend, for denying him, seems a pretty loud message, don't you think?
Yeah, not as loud as Jesus forgiving S. Truett Cathy.
S. Truett Cathy? Who's that?
S. Truett Cathy, he's the founder of Chick-fil-A. We didn't invent the chicken. We didn't invent the chicken, we just invented the chicken sandwich.
I've heard that slogan.
Yeah, it's kind of tough there. It's hard to believe. What a thing to be known for. You slice the meat off the bone, then you roll it lightly in bread, flour, and then you fry it, and then you put it on a toasted buttered bun with a pickle.
Yeah, but it is good with them waffle fries.
Yeah, but then they turn the cows against us. They're out there, they eat more chicken.
Now, Rooster.
Now, look. Come on, learn how to spell, bossy.
Well, I'm trying to understand, what does S. Truett Cathy have to do with the grace of God?
Well, it's kind of, if you think about it this way, it took a mighty powerful love for man to forgive his friend for denying him. But then you think about it too, it took an awful miraculous love for somebody to forgive a man that invented a chicken sandwich.
Well, Rooster, I'm glad you could be here today to share your insights and your wisdom with us.
Well, I appreciate it, but I hope it ain't another 2,000 years before you speak to me.
Well, have you ever thought about writing a book?
Writing a book? Man, nobody reads anymore. I'm writing a screenplay.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, if anybody knows Johnny Depp, I want to talk to him and do me.
Shouldn't that be Foghorn Leghorn?
No, the only time they mention my name in church is because it rhymes with Booster.
Oh, that's right. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for Mr. Rooster.
All right. So remember what next Sunday is? Impossible Sunday. Sunday we're going to celebrate Jesus and His resurrection. It's also a day that we're going to celebrate. We're going to try to get as many people as we can in this auditorium. So there's some little cards on your pews, by the way, that says, "Come as you are, Clark Fairway Church of Christ" on the back. Invited to our Easter service. Take some of those with you. Hand them out to your friends and to your family. If you run out of those, see Charlie Moffitt. He'll give you some more. But our Rooster, as we'll now know him. But please invite your friends and your family and your neighbors, and we would love next Sunday to see this building completely packed. They've got a lot of people that are camping this weekend. It's kind of empty, but next Sunday, hopefully we will have this building packed as we celebrate Easter and celebrate Jesus' resurrection. After Jesus ate the Passover with the disciples, Matthew recorded these words. When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." And Peter replied, "Even if all fall away, I never will." And Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And the other disciples said the same thing. A moment of decision. It came a few hours after the disciples said those words. After they made that emphatic declaration that they would never deny or disown Jesus. A few hours later, when Jesus was arrested, Matthew writes, these words. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. I wonder if Matthew felt a twinge of guilt when he wrote those words. Maybe it was a haunting memory of that night. Maybe he reflected on his fear and his cowardice. Maybe his remorse. Maybe Matthew felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Maybe the understanding of Jesus' incredible forgiveness just flooded his soul. Maybe he wrote those words thinking how grateful he was that Jesus gave him a second chance. Maybe he wrote those words years later, maybe contemplating that he never made the same mistake twice. Or maybe he reminded himself of the danger of being too self-confident or too sure of himself. Maybe writing those words made Matthew remain watchful and vigilant. That night was a moment of decision for a lot of people. For Matthew, for Peter, for all the other disciples, for the high priest, for the Sanhedrin, for the Pharisees, for the Sadducees, even for Jesus. It was a night of decision. You know, the church is relational, and we work, our whole society, it seems, is built on relationship, isn't it? And sometimes those relationships can be very positive, and sometimes those relationships can be negative. Those who faced that decision that night were influenced by those around them. Some were influenced in a very positive way. Some were influenced in a very negative way. Our social structures are relational. Our church is relational. I mean, even in our relationships in church, we're commanded to love each other, to encourage each other. We're responsible to build each other up, to give each other a sense of purpose and direction. Yet at the same time, we're called on to convict one another and to keep one another pure, to keep one another holy. And you don't have to be in the world very long to realize that people can be deceived and changed by those who are around them. On the positive side, maybe we use those for a really great purpose. Maybe on the negative side, every one of us could probably think of a situation where we made a decision based upon the people around us instead of making the decision based on how we really wanted to feel and to think. That we compromised our values. So I want to share just a little bit this morning about some people who were in this story. John. Of all the disciples, it seems as if John stayed the closest to Jesus. Not that he didn't flee and run away at the beginning. But later at Jesus' crucifixion, we know that John is at the foot of the cross. John is an interesting character in this story. There's this passage in John. It says, Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. The other disciple probably being John. And because the disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. And the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. That's an interesting verse. You know, and it raises a lot of questions. If it were John, and I think it probably was, the question is, how did John know the high priest? And very interestingly, the text never tells us how John knew the high priest. Some have surmised maybe he was family. Some have surmised maybe he was an attendant. I don't have any idea. But it's interesting that he knew. But the thing about John is, even if he knew the high priest well enough that he could speak to the girl and get inside and bring Peter in with him, he at least remained true to his conviction about who Jesus was and didn't allow his relationship with the high priest to change or alter or confuse his understanding of who Jesus is. And I think that's a remarkable part of the story. Can you be around a group of people who are so convinced that Jesus is something different than what he says he is, but you can remain true to your conviction? Enough that you could even go into the courtyard and stand there. I don't know all the things that John did in the courtyard. I don't know if he went further than Peter or what happened that night, but the fact that John seemingly, at least for a large part, remained somewhat true to Jesus, enough that he went to the cross. And then there's Peter, isn't it? 3 times he denied Jesus. 3 times he said he didn't know him. I love the way that John records it. He says, one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off. You remember that part of the story? So one of the servants, who is a relative of the man that Peter cut the ear off of, said, didn't I see you with him in the olive grove? And Peter denied it. And at that very moment, a rooster began to crow. I mean, that's just not somebody out of the crowd. Somebody who was related to the guy that Peter cut the ear off of. But yet Peter denied again, knowing. You know, and there's a lesson there. We don't spend all the time on Peter, but when it comes to a moment where we have to choose, can we be true? You know, Peter had great faith, didn't he? I mean, Peter walked on water. I mean, at least for a little while, right? And you say, well, yeah, but then he began to doubt and began to sink. I understand that, but there are 11 guys there, and Peter's the only one that got out of the boat. I mean, so you gotta understand, Peter had some faith. Peter wasn't afraid to speak up. Peter wasn't afraid in the garden to draw out his sword and cut the ear off the servant of the high priest, was he? So he had action and he had faith, but there became this point where he was surrounded by people who had a different opinion of Jesus, and he was weak. And he didn't speak up. But we've never been there, have we? We've never been in a group of people who had a different idea or value system than we had, and then we were swayed by the group so that we made a decision that we really didn't want to make. We've probably never been in the heat of a business deal where we had to make an opportunity to make a lot of money, but we had to do something that was a little bit on the edges of being ethical to make it, and we decided that it was okay to go ahead and do that. We've never been in a situation where somebody asked us to compromise our beliefs and we weren't able to stand up for what we believed in. So are we members of a really conviction-driven group of Christians, or sometimes does our perspective float with our personal feelings? It's amazing that they tried Jesus in one night. I don't want to say much about the Roman trial. I don't know a lot about the Roman trial. There's some things that we can know about the Jewish trial system that we can read from other documents. And there were a couple of rules in there that were violated that night. And I don't want to spend much time on this. I just want you to be aware of them. In criminal cases, a trial must begin by day. If not completed by nightfall, it must be adjourned and resumed the next day. And they questioned Jesus at night and also had a trial the next morning, so that one's a little iffy. Only a verdict of not guilty could cause a trial to be completed in one day. One night must be allowed before a verdict so feelings of mercy might have time to arise, which didn't happen. No criminal could be convicted based on his own evidence. Yet that is exactly the way they convicted Jesus when they could not find anyone who could bring witness and testimony against him. All evidence had to be agreed on by at least 2 witnesses, where 2 or 3. And that was obviously not the case because they couldn't find 2 people to agree. And witnesses had to be examined apart from each other, not together, which also doesn't seem to happen. So all of those rules bring us to 2 other people in the story, Annas and Caiaphas. The high priest. One had been the high priest, one of his son-in-law. It's a little confusion about who served where and who served when. It seems as if at this time maybe Annas was actually the high priest, but Caiaphas, who had been the high priest before him and removed, he still had a great amount of power. So they're both referred to as high priest in the story. And I think the thing you could say about Annas and Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and the Sadducees that night is they are all blinded by their own agenda and prejudice. They had an agenda. They wanted Jesus Christ put to death. They wanted him condemned. And it did not matter what they found out or what anybody else said. They were just so set on their own agenda. And corrupt networks have always plagued mankind, haven't they? I mean, just because somebody has a religious title doesn't mean they're religious. Doesn't even mean that they're decent. But usually if people have an agenda, truth and fairness usually go out the window when people have an agenda. And in the minority of people, even among Christians, there are some people who simply rearrange the truth and reinterpret it within their own framework. And if you have a group of people like Annas and Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the teachers of law who are on an agenda, it is very hard to move them off of their set agenda. And so they eventually got what they wanted. Using Pilate, using Herod, they finally got Jesus condemned to death. But that brings us to two other individuals. Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the council, a member of the Sanhedrin, who didn't agree with their decision. I don't know how vocal he was in the trial, it never says. Don't know how he chose to stand up. Don't know what he chose to say. He was a prominent member. I do know this, that the Scripture says that he went and asked for the body of Jesus. He was a wealthy man, and he was going to bury Jesus in a tomb. 71 members in the Sanhedrin. At least one man, and maybe two with Nicodemus, but at least one, it says, didn't agree with it. At least one man who stood up. He couldn't change the mind of all 71, could he? It might have been a 70-1 vote. I don't know. Maybe he got mad, and maybe he was so frustrated with him he didn't even vote. Maybe he chose not to. When you get into a group of people and everybody else has one opinion and you have another one, and the one that you have is right, can you stand up for that one? Can you stand up now? I love our eldership here. I mean, I love our elder. I love the 7 men that I serve with. You know, one of the greatest things about those 7 men, the 8 of us in the room, you can say what you want to say without a great amount of fear of what everybody else is going to do to you. They're not going to take you out and tar and feather you. They're not going to lynch you up on the side of a tree somewhere. You know what? We're 8 men and we have 8 very different opinions on a lot of things. But you know what? If I feel strongly about something, I'm okay feeling strongly about it with that group of men. You know, and if we go around and 7 guys say, I think we ought to do this, and I feel differently than that, I'm very comfortable with those guys saying, guys, I know all 7 of you are for this, but I'm just not really for it. Now, what that means is sometimes we have decisions and we don't get our way. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? I think in your group in your eldership, there are a lot of times that one of us, or 2 of us, or 3 of us, or 4 of us, whatever, we won't get our way. So we go around the room and we vote. And if it's 5-3, that's what we decide. What if you're one of the 3? You just stomp out of there, right? Can't believe they did that. No. If they vote 5-3 and I'm one of the 3, you know what? I'm on board with that, guys. Because I trust those other men. I trust their spirituality. I trust that they've prayed over it. I trust their decisions. But when it gets to those moments, can you stand up for what you believe in? Can you stand up for what you think? If you're in a situation where there are 70 people who are against Jesus, can you be the one who doesn't agree with their decision? Nicodemus, remember the Sanhedrin who came to Jesus at night at the very beginning of John. Don't really know anything else much about him. He questioned one time the decision they were making about Jesus, and and kind of said, hey, now wait a minute about this, and you get that, and then the next time you see him, the third time in John, he is there to help Joseph of Arimathea bury the body of Jesus. Maybe two men who stood up. How about the crowd? How about the crowd? Man, you remember a couple of sermons ago, just less than a week before this, they're saying, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Man, they're throwing palm leaves out and coats on the ground and praising Jesus. What are they going to do before the next day is over? Crucify him. I mean, just shouting, crucify him. How were they so easily swayed? Man, I think about that crowd and I think, man, were they just swayed by the disciples a week before because they saw the disciples doing this? They thought, hey, man, this is cool. We'll just jump on the bandwagon and do this. And then it gets down toward the end of the week and they see the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin and the high priest going this direction. They think, well, we'll just go that direction with them. Man, is it easy to sway a crowd? And then when you do sway a crowd, is it hard to get them back under control? Man, crowds can do crazy things, can't they? And it doesn't matter if it's a crowd that's marching against some political thing or a crowd who's trying to make some statement or, something that is so unique to our life now. What happens when everybody on social media gets against something, whether they should be or not? If social media reacts negatively to somebody's statement, that'll make the news, won't it? That'll get right on CBS. All these people are against. Well, man, it's amazing how a crowd can change. And it's amazing how a crowd can sway people. We've seen that in positive ways in church life. We've seen it in negative ways in church life too, haven't we, honestly? Do you just follow along with the crowd? As long as everybody else is for it, is it okay? Is it easier to follow than to be a leader? When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. And he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you? And Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. Pilate didn't have power over Jesus. Jesus was choosing. That was a moment of decision for Jesus. In that garden when he prayed, Father, if it is your will, let this cup pass from me, but not your will, my will, but your will be done. Remember that verse? Do you not realize I can call 12 legions of angels? That was a pretty big crowd that went out there, I think. But if you throw in 12 legions of angels, I'm thinking probably the entire Roman army is no match for 12 legions of angels. Don't you realize I can? But he didn't. He did not. The moment of decision for Jesus was that he came to this earth to die on the cross for our sin, and he was not going to relent from that decision. It was his to make. And he made it. For you. For me. So what happens when you get to the moment of decision? If you figured out that our hearts are deceitful, and we usually as individuals have feet of clay, that we really need strength from above. When you look out at the world around you, do you realize you probably really expect too much from mankind? You have a very realistic God view of what humanity is like. Are you one of those who is a conviction-driven Christian? Or do you tend to float with personal opinion and the decision of others? How about personal agenda? Do you ever have any personal agenda that gets in the way of you really following Jesus? You can't put your personal agenda aside to follow God's direction for your life? Are you thankful? Are you thankful that God is a God of second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth chances? Have you been able to release yourself from the guilt of your past, but at the same time letting it hold you humble and keep you convicted? See, that night was a moment of decision for many people. And today is a moment of decision for many of you. Will you be a follower of Jesus? If you need to respond to the invitation, we'll ask you to do that while we stand and sing.